Welcome to the Simpleton podcast. I'm Clark Massey with Simple House, and I am with
Laura Heeman.
Hello, Laura.
Hey, Clark.
All right, we've got 4 areas to cover today, and we're going to roll. We're going to react to Deacon Tyler and Catholic Church lobbying. We're going to talk about a cool blog that Amy Wellborn put out this week, along with mentioning Russell Brand. We're going to do some housekeeping, and then we're going to go on to our main topic, which is the mass grave hoax in Canada that the Catholic Church was blamed for, and what's true in that, what's clearly a hoax in that, and the persecution that came out of that included quite a few church burnings. Mm-hmm. But it's something I feel like Americans, and even myself, wasn't aware of until very recently. It all happened last year. All right. Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. So we just had on Deacon Tyler. He was the head of Catholic lobbying at the state level in Missouri, and he kind of explained the Catholic Church's role in politics. I think it raised a question that I want to hear your opinion on, Laura, which is where should the church be involving itself in politics? So the first area that's kind of clear is an area where we have a very strong, clear teaching, like pro-life, anti-death penalty, issues like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second area that I feel like most Catholics don't realize, but kind of is obvious when you think about it, is in all of these states, we're running school districts, like literally hundreds of schools, mm-hmm. major hospitals, other projects, and policy decisions greatly affect our work, right? Yeah. And so the lobbyist's job is to look out for the best interests of the church on these major projects. Mm-hmm. And I can kind of justify that the church is doing that. It makes sense that the church is looking out for its own interests at that. The third area, though, that was interesting is the social doctrine of the church tells us what our goals are, but mm-hmm. doesn't prescribe our means to the goals, mm-hmm. right? And there's a number of issues that are always coming up in politics where Catholics could take both sides of the issue. And the ones that are most interesting, I think, are the government services to the poor. Yeah. Right. What do you think? Do you think the church should be taking up positions there?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to think about what positions are actually important, foundational, basic, teachings of the church, and how we help the poor, immigration, gun control. There's a lot of prudential judgment, in a lot of hot button issues like that. And when I was listening to it, I was thinking about with abortion, it's there aren't that many issues that are like abortion where you're weighing one good against another. We think a mom keeping the baby is good for mom, good for baby, good for society. Whereas with an issue like the poor, you have to balance different ideas, like helping a person, with material goods versus helping a person become more self-sustaining and thriving.
Right. And when I was kind of on the advisory board, and I was chosen to be on the advisory board just because of the work with Simple House, working with the poor, there'd be these new policies that would come up that would be let's create savings accounts for new poor mothers, or let's do mm-hmm. this or that, and we'll fund the savings account, it'd just be some policy. And I'd be I'm very underwhelmed with our current policies. Yeah. With the way we're sheltering the poor, with the way we're feeding the poor, with all the different current government programs, I don't see great fruit. I'm underwhelmed. I think we've got a problem of a group of people who've enculturated being dependent on the government, and I don't have any solutions right off, but I'm hesitant to say, go start a new program.
Yeah, I actually think that one thing that has been really key in my defining some of my political views has been our work at a Simple House. It totally changed my view of the government programs we have in place and the government's ability to, put forth a program that is actually helpful.
In my opinion, I'm underwhelmed with what the government programs are right now, and I wish they were better. I've never been for just revoking them because I'm not sure what chaos would result from that. Having said that, I don't see a real useful role of the Catholic Church just supporting generically programs for the poor, or even commenting on things like Medicare, Medicaid expansion. And my 2 reasons would be, I don't feel like we have great expertise as a church in these areas. Yeah. And I also just factually, there just are a lot of Catholics on both sides of that issue. And I just don't know that we should. It seems like we should be using our voice to look out for our programs, to be on very clear issues and save our voice and just kind of step back from some of these other debates.
Yeah. It is. I don't know if this is actually right, but it seems to me like the Catholic Church has, in a lot of ways, been like, okay, we support this, we support that, we don't support this, we don't. And like especially with the poor, which is like so complicated. There hasn't been like a very nuanced view. It's just like programs for the poor, we support it, you know?
And you do need a nuanced view because our programs are underwhelming.
They're
the ones
failing.
we actually do fund.
They're failing in many, many ways. Yeah.
All right. And then there's this other thing he said that was a great statement when Deacon Tyler said, if you don't have a chair at the table, you're on the table.
Yeah.
Right?
I
know. And that was like, it was, because it was like, that sounds really true, you know?
Yeah.
And that I think is why, you can't just run a school district and act like policy doesn't matter. And act like you don't want to have a say on the state government level on how education policy is formed. Like you need to get there or you're on the table, they'll be dividing you up, Related to that, though, is we're going to talk about this Canadian situation where a persecution broke out and it was like the tinder was already there for the fire, And I think it had to do with the Catholics not speaking up the way the old Catholic Defamation League would have spoken up on issues and things.
Yeah.
We kind of allowed the tinder to build. And then when this outrageous story comes out that's false, the tinder ignites, and then you have 68 church burnings, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So,
I think the other thing that stood out to me was this idea that the church will always be a sign of contradiction, and that there's not going to be like a political party that we're like, oh, good, we're set, because we agree with everything that they say, that the church will always be a challenge to, whatever political leader we have. But then on the other hand, he talks about his work trying to like show and convince people that the policies that the church is for are like for the good of society. So it's not just rejecting or being a thorn in the side all the time,
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what the contradiction is there, but I kind of want to go deeper into that because what I hear you talking about is a theme that I want to keep doing, which is disingenuous conversation. And what I mean by that is like when Protestants and Catholics were at each other's throats, which was up until quite recently. My dad even talks about the Catholic kids. He was a Protestant kid, would throw rocks at them at the playground, just because they were Protestant,
Yeah.
When you have these two groups trying to live together, the Catholics and the Protestants, you create this secular space where you're like, let's talk about the common good. Let's not use sectarian reasons. And we have enough common values. We can build a good society where we both can thrive.
Right.
Now, that's an interesting project. And I think it bore good fruit. I would say our own society is part of that fruit. The problem is that works really well with people who do have common values.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like when you have the Catholics and the Protestants, there's actually so much agreement between those two groups on most of Christianity, that you can build a society based on the commonalities. Right. But when you start adding in other groups, the main one being like an atheism or progressive atheism or Islam or whatever like that, you start losing at every level the common values. Right. And I think that part of the secular ethic was to assume the best of the person you're working with, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm assuming that you're actually trying to build a good society with me, and that assumption's kind of necessary. But as you lose these common values, that assumption becomes worse and worse and worse and less true because the person's not necessarily working with you because they have different values.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's this idea that has always been, I had it for many years and I've kind of been losing it. And I think Deacon Tyler expressed it a little bit where it's like, well, these people, care about the poor, know, and we assume they sincerely care about the poor. Well, I'm becoming convinced that a lot of people speaking out on race and poverty and things like that actually don't care about the group they're speaking out. It's like a power play. Yeah. And I think the younger generation sees through that right away.
Yeah, I think we're still, you and I and our parents are like still waking up to that. Like.
Yes, we're still waking up. That people aren't always sincere when they say this.
Yeah, I do think a lot of people are being insincere. But even if people are being sincere, I think it's like a lot of energy wasted on arguing about things when you don't have the same foundational blocks.
Right. All right. I want to give a couple examples to kind of illustrate disingenuous conversation. So at Simple House, when you arrive, one of the first things we talk about with evangelization is if an atheist wants to argue with you about the Catholic faith, you usually want to avoid that argument.
Yeah.
Right. Why? I actually get to talk about the Catholic faith with someone who's interested.
Yeah.
Why would I avoid that argument? Well, you're talking to someone who you're in a conversation where you've got to defend 2,000 years of church history. You've got to defend the Old and the New Testament. You have to defend an enormous book of Catholic teaching. And they have no ground to poke at. And what you find in these arguments is they're just trying to create some doubt, and they're talking about something that's very sacred to you. Right? And it's just not an argument that's a healthy argument. They're not actually authentically wanting to talk about the most sacred things in reality. If they were, I'd say have that conversation.
Yeah, totally.
Instead, you're kind of in this like poking thing, and they will poke something that you don't have a good apologetic for. And even your good apologetics tend to ring hollow when they just keep being a moving target. All right.
But they like have a strategic military position because they know your teachings. They know the
whole basis of the conversation favors them, and they kind of don't care at the end of the day, whereas you deeply care. Yeah. Okay. So like if a Republican or somebody who's an American who really values constitutional freedoms is in a conversation with someone who doesn't, this becomes a disingenuous conversation because that person will use the Constitution when it works for them and discard it when it doesn't. You know? And I'm seeing this with like basic human rights, right? Like the UN is a failed institution right now. Yeah. And the reason why it's a failed institution, it was kind of built on the assumption that we had a lot of common values. Yeah. You know, it's clear that when you go from Protestants and Catholic, there's a lot of common values. It's also true that when you go wider, that there's things like don't murder. Like almost all the societies of the world frown on murder or theft, right? Yeah. But it's not clear at all that there's a lot of societies in the world where they're like, don't murder within my in-group, but they don't seem to feel a lot of guilt for murdering the other, the foreigner, the other race or the other country or the other whatever, right?
And even now we also have countries where it's like they don't seem to have a problem, discarding their own people, which that's even crazier.
Or minorities within their own community or whatever for the good of the country, right? Mm-hmm. And this is true of kind of like Islamic nations have a different view on this than the Christian nations. And it's also true that the Eastern nations, particularly China, has a very different view on this than, and like Russia is a historically Christian nation, but like they just seem to have an attitude that their people are grist for the mill. Yeah. You know what I mean? For the greater glory of Russia, that most of the Western nations are horrified by, right? Yeah. So there's just different values here. I'm not even commenting on which one's right or wrong, but if you get them all in the same room and you say, hey, here's what we all agree to, let's have a conversation, and people in that room actually just don't agree and won't admit that they don't agree, but like, why is China on the Human Rights Committee when they're having an act of genocide? Yeah. They're there to screw it up. Yeah. You know, they're not there to feel bad. They're not there to be called to listen to their better angels. They're there to just screw it up. So the whole thing is like a disingenuous conversation, which when you are the person being duped is very negative. Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. I hope we made a little bit of sense of that. I feel like that was pretty tangential, but what else you got, Laura? You ready to go to Amy Wellborn?
Yeah, let's talk about a wonderful, wonderful little blog post that I came across. My friend sent me a Amy Wellborn blog post that was highlighting a recent episode of Beavis and Butt-head.
Yes, so Amy Wellborn blogs on Beavis and Butt-head and makes a very powerful point. Yeah. That we need evangelization for stupid sinners. Yeah. Not just for the intellectuals and the Anglicans who want to convert. Here is the clip that Amy Wellborn is referencing.
Looking for answers? Perhaps I can help.
So, Your Honor, I want to know how I can get Jesus to help me out, if you know what I'm saying.
To study the nature of the Christ, I could refer you to any number of papal encyclicals.
Yeah.
But I would suggest you start with the Crusted Deus Laudadici, because it is addressed specifically to the laity. It was written by Pope John Paul II after a special synod of bishops in Rome. Crusted Deus is a powerful statement redefining the role of the laity.
Yeah, really. Something.
Anyway, you're going to want to read this as well.
Yeah, I guess maybe, take a look, Yeah, just gonna go ahead and put these here. I'll be safe.
All right. What are your thoughts, Laura?
So I feel like this clip is surprising in that the criticism is like right on, but I feel like most sort of pop culture criticisms of the church are either like over-excited youth pastor types or like pedophiles, right? And this is like actually like hitting at this like very real problem in the church.
The over-intellectualization of the good news.
Exactly. And the inability to like get out of that, even when you've got someone literally coming in your church doors into your office and asking for help.
Right. Speaking a language they don't understand, not being able to provide them the enlightenment, the blessing of Jesus, open grace to them because you've over-intellectualized it.
Yes.
Now, this was our feedback in the Catholic Synod, was that we do not have RCIA programs. We do not have evangelization programs to help poor, stupid sinners, right?
Yeah.
And I want to challenge everyone. It's just a scandal we don't have this. And I wish, Simpleton probably needs to start a huge project on this. Somebody needs to do a project to create this, right? Simpleton has been running RCIAs for people because of this.
I think pretty much every person we've had come into the church, at least in DC, we've had to kind of basically make up their RCIA. And then we've had some involvement to more or lesser degrees with the different priests, that have been.
What I would love is for there to be a more general curriculum, And my hint is I would love to go after the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and see, can that be made for adults? I don't know enough about it to say either way, but like my that's my hunch is that that's where the gold might be.
Yeah. The Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, it's like, Maria Montessori had like different kind of ideas about like the stages of development of a child and like, where is the appropriate time to like introduce different pieces of the good news, and
so you're saying that like it's tied into child development timelines.
It's tied into child development, but I want to say something about it. And then there's a lot of like manual, like manipulatives and like very physical interaction with like what you're trying to do. But an example is like the little kids, they start with like the Good Shepherd, like Jesus as the Good Shepherd rather than like bloody Jesus on the cross,
Sure.
And I think like a lot of times what we want to do is like, welcome to the church. Here's this intellectual, explanation of this like obscure teaching, or here's like all the sexual moral teaching of the church. You should start doing this now. And it's like, we need people to come to know Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Like that's like,
right. Yeah. And I don't think that, obviously we're not going to take the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and just start doing like 40-year-old drug addicts and throwing them into it. You know what I mean? But like, I do think though that like the insight to that, and I've been at Montessori talks before at my own kids' school where they'll be like, all right, here's how we try to teach intrinsic motivation in the classroom. Right. I went to a talk like that. And it means like people being motivated by like
self-motivated
as opposed to being motivated by penalties and rewards. Right. When I heard that talk, I was like, oh my gosh, if you could offer this for adults, you'd be like selling out theaters. You know what I mean? People do talk about that though. Influencers, business people, etc. talk about. Right. But like there actually is a strategy for teaching intrinsic motivation within Montessori. And maybe it's tied to developmental timelines like everything in Montessori is to make it most appropriate to an age group. But like, man, can we salvage any of it? Because if you could give someone 1% better intrinsic motivation, you've done a lot. Okay, let's get on from this. Okay, along with Amy Wellborn, Laura found a great clip by Russell Brand.
Yes. So if you don't know, several years ago, Russell Brand sobered up and he's like a really deep intelligent person with a lot of great insight, some of which you may agree with, some not, but I think kind of worth paying attention to.
Right here is part of his evangelical, what do you call it, rant.
Do you fall in love much too fast? I used to do that. Oh my God, this appetite, this magnetism to pull together. Long before it became eroticized, it was just a very pure kind of longing, a longing to love and be loved, open-faced, teary-eyed devotion. You know, of like how it works in mythology, like with Eros or Cupid or whatever, shooting you with an arrow. It's a sense that some external thing has bewildered, dumbfounded, spellbound and enchanted you. But I sense that this euphoria does not endure, is not sustainable. Am I willing to change? Am I willing to sacrifice? Am I willing to put this person's needs ahead of mine? If you're not willing to do that, what you're experiencing is just possibly attraction than affection, and it could be a carnal yearning. When I remember, like as a famous person, like sleeping with people, and like I didn't want them to leave sometimes. I was always looking for more. It was very confronting, not because of the rejection, although a bit that, mostly because I recognised that I sort of my guts, my life was so exposed. I had such a lot of yearning in me. That now what I recognise is that love is a very powerful, beautiful force, this feeling of yearning. But for me, it's very important to remove the selfishness from it. Real love it ain't so acquisitive. It's not about control. It's not about holding on. It's about letting go. Real love is quite sort of painful, and I think you will probably discover that it is a spiritual and religious impulse that you're feeling rather than a romantic one. Romanticism itself, the endowing of objects or phenomena or people with divine qualities. And for me, love, even if it is the love of another person, must be connected to divinity and therefore service and selflessness. That might be your way out of this mad carousel of falling in love with people and giving your heart out like a Ferrero Rocher.
All right. What do you got?
Yeah, I love this because this is kind of like the art of being a missionary or something. Like our missionaries are like, oh, this person is like living like an immoral life. I have to tell them that they're living an immoral life, you know? And it's like, here's the Catholic Church teaching. And it's like, so what, you know? And in this clip, Russell Brand is like, I was having this problem. It was making me unhappy, and I had to kind of figure out what I was like actually looking for, you know, and I was trying to put like this kind of like level of like love and fulfillment on a person when really I was having kind of like a desire for like an encounter with the divine, you know, and it's just like I was flawed. I gained some self-knowledge. I realized this was hurting me. I did this stuff to like turn my life around, and I'm like a deeper, happier, healthier person in touch with God now.
Great.
And I think that's like, we have to have our missionaries, and like all of us need to be able to answer like, what is the good news? And what is the good news in your life, you know?
Right. So two great things coming out of Amy Wilborn and Russell Brand recently.
Yeah.
Now let's go into housekeeping. All right, we got three little topics in here. One is, we mentioned the Vatican secret archives. Laura did not know the secret archives existed.
Right.
All right.
In our last podcast.
So let's clarify what these things are, just in case you haven't heard of them either. All right. There is a rare books collection at the Vatican that's deep within the stacks that they don't let people in. All right. And it's called the private archives. Now, the word private, I think in Latin is secretum. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And therefore, the English language world has labeled these things the secret archives. I think because of this huge confusion that has launched many a conspiracy theory, this often is tied in whenever they want to rope the Pope into the conspiracy theory, they mention the secret archives. They've changed the name to the Apostolic Archives. Now, have they ever really been secret and private? Yes, in a way, yes. What they did is they would try to make sure that a academic wasn't completely anti-church, and then they would let him use the archives. in a reading
So
room.
this is the archives. Like, I've heard people say they've like asked permission to get the Vatican files on blah, blah, blah. This is what we're talking about.
So there's probably a public archives also. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that. But the other thing is that it used to be that they vetted the academics a lot, and then you could kind of go to a rare books room and they would bring you the manuscript you wanted. Now, of course, if you're a conspiracy-minded person, you would think that there might be some things not in the card catalog that are in that archive because you're not actually wandering around checking it out. But in recent years, they brought the journalists down there to film it and just see what it is, like behind, out of the reading room into the stacks. There's a vault underneath it to survive like floods and fires and things like that, to keep the most rare things in. They let them go into there. And they're also opening it way bigger up, you know, so that more scholars, not even just the more Catholic-friendly scholars, can get access to what the Vatican has in their rare books.
Yeah.
So it's not so much a secret archives anymore, and it never really was a truly secret archives.
Yeah.
But it is interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Another thing, as part of our podcast, we want to do a episode on how to live a less consumeristic lifestyle. If you have a tip about a product or a vintage good or a way that you just like do without something and it works really well, please send it to us. We're going to try to take a top 5. And if we have more than 5, maybe we'll do another episode later doing another 5.
What's kind of the framing or the motivation for this? Because I feel like people could go in all kinds of different directions with that.
Well, part of it is just Simple House. People associate us with simple living and they ask me for this stuff all the time. And part of it is my own like desire to share some of the things that, you know, I've stumbled across, you know. And I just think there's demand for it. Like I was even hanging out last night with my crew I call the Recovering Nihilists. Hello, Nate and Esteban, if you're out there. But like even they were talking about kind of the problem of the over-consumeristic lifestyle spiritually.
Yeah.
You know, so I just think it's pretty obvious that this would be a good thing.
Yeah.
All right. Last point of housekeeping. Monday Night Football. We're going to talk the NFL. All right. Chiefs Raiders coming from Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium.
Hey, this is Ben, the editor. Quick note, this episode was recorded on Thursday, October 13th, which was just after Week 5 of the NFL, where the Chiefs played the Raiders.
There was this really interesting thing that happened in the Chiefs-Raider game on Monday night, where one of the Chiefs players did the best play of his whole football career. In one motion, sacked the quarterback, caused a fumble, and recovered the fumble in a half second, right? And then fell and braced his fall so he didn't crush the quarterback, which you're supposed to do also, right? With the free hand that was not holding the football. This is like as perfect a 1 second action as any football player has ever done in their career, right? And it was taken away with a roughing the passer penalty. So what should have been this guy's greatest highlight became a non-existent play. And that's interesting a little bit, but what was also interesting was they then played on the Jumbotron at Arrowhead and the boos begin. And the boos go on and on for the rest of that drive. And then the Chiefs come out and have a drive and the boos only stop when the Chiefs quarterback's getting ready to hike the ball. And then as soon as the play comes to an end a few seconds later, the boos restart again and they go all the way through halftime.
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And as someone who's sitting at home watching it, I'm like uncomfortable. Like I can't even imagine being in the crowd. I've always been kind of afraid of like being in crowds when they're like get this like idea. You know, do they get jazzed up about?
Well, I'm like, way to go, crowd.
Right. And I do think that like that player who had that play taken away from him will feel better because of how much that was stood up for, right? But then my wife came in and she's like, I'm not sure those refs didn't know they weren't going to get torn apart.
Ooh.
You know, because there's 50,000 people and Arrowhead is the loudest stadium in the NFL. So you can only imagine when they have real motivation, how loud that was, right? And then I've heard other people comment that there was some worry about getting those refs out of the stadium.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
This is interesting. When my wife made the comment, she said, you know, we have so much kind of like unsettledness in our society right now that watching a crowd of 50,000 do that is alarming.
Yeah.
You know, like for safety, like you just like, who knows what could happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, I thought that was interesting.
Fortunately, it was in Kansas City.
Why?
And not Buffalo or Philly.
Does Kansas City have a reputation for being more? I mean, Philly has a particularly bad reputation, but
and so does Buffalo. But
Buffalo, okay, so we're the nice guys here. We just vocally
people are nicer
express.
in Kansas City. That's a fact. That's
Okay.
just like a fact.
We'll accept this fact.
Your brother-in-law and I both like got to the airport and we were like, you know, I think he said this. We were both like, oh, people are being nice here. It's great.
All right. Well, we will. You've now gotten your Monday Night Football news from your Simpleton podcast. All right, moving on. Main topic. All right. Laura and I thought we would divide this topic where I'm going to give the facts and Laura's going to give the hot take. All right, let's talk about the facts that I don't think are widely known in the U.S. about what just went down in Canada in the last year and how crazy it was. Now there was a Catholic persecution related to it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Canada has a history of boarding schools for their Indigenous population, and this has partially been run by the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And partially not. And it also became a big government initiative for assimilation. Right?
And it was compulsory.
Yes.
For First Nation people.
At least in some cases, compulsory.
Yeah.
And the other thing to know about this is to think about the definition of genocide. So genocide is not just the killing off of a certain genetic group. Genocide, according to the UN, which I've already made fun of in this episode, but according to them, which I think is a good definition, is if you're trying to wipe out someone's culture, like forcibly assimilate, that is also genocide. You're trying to wipe out a certain diversity of the human population, even just culturally, right? Mm. So there was this expressed goal to kind of forcibly assimilate these kids away from their parents. Now, this is horrible. We also have all that we already know, and if you want to listen to the Simpleton podcast on the church sex abuse crisis, like when you had these church institutions that did not have safeguards against sexual abuse, exploitation, things like this, guess what? You had sexual abuse and exploitation, right? So we know all that happened. The church is not innocent here. Neither is the Canadian government. And there is a ton to apologize for and to deal with in that. Not a lot to be proud of. Okay.
Yeah. Having
said that, all of this, there were some unreported deaths, some abnormal number of deaths, like a higher death rate for the kids when they were at these schools. No official report has said foul play. It's just, abnormal number of deaths. What I would like to comment on that, because we just read a great book about Bishop Ford of Maryknoll. Mm-hmm. This book is from the 50s or the 60s. Okay. And Bishop Ford came out of Long Island and became a bishop in China and lived his whole life there, right? And at one point in the book, he talks about being in a small town as a missionary priest, taking over from some French missionaries in China and starting an orphanage, right? There's this letter that they've preserved in the book where he's talking about how great it is when the Maryknoll sisters come and take over the orphanage. And he says, now the kids think that when they cry, they'll get fed. Back when we used to run it, the kids would stop crying because they lost hope of getting fed or changed. And he also said that they're not sending as many babies to heaven as the priest did, right? Meaning like they're not having as many deaths in their orphanage as when the priest ran the orphanage, when the sisters ran the orphanage, right?
Yeah.
And this was like kind of being said lightheartedly about how great the sisters are, that they've improved the care so much. But like as a modern reader, you're reading that and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Because like I think myself, like if you were in a situation where it's like, well, let's say I'm a priest, right? And I have the choice of here's 4 infants and I have to try to keep them alive, or I can fully exercise my missionary duty and do all these sacraments and do this, right?
Yeah.
I would almost always choose to keep those 4 babies alive, right? But of course, that would undermine the whole mission.
Yeah.
And the ultimate good of all the kids in that society is going to be if they get better values about like orphanages and children and things like that, which is what the missionary work's all about. So there's this weird situation the priests were in, but it looked horrible.
Yeah.
In a lot of societies, these orphanages didn't exist before they were founded by the Catholic mission, and therefore these kids were often just infanticide situations.
Yeah. I'm not sure that this is like is exactly what we're talking about, but that's really interesting.
It is really interesting, but it just shows that sometimes Catholic missionaries weren't running things that we thought would look great. And it was just weird to see a primary source article about it in our book club.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was an abnormal number of deaths at these schools.
Like tuberculosis and Spanish flu were examples.
Higher death rate at the schools.
Like much higher.
Much higher. And not all the graves were marked, but they were in graveyards, it appears. And it was kind of like a potter's field. Like not all the graves in a potter's field are marked.
Yeah.
All right. In 2007, the Indigenous people of Canada did a class action lawsuit about all this harm that had happened to them through these assimilation policies and these like boarding schools. And as part of the settlement, which was a very big settlement from the Canadian government, there was a commission formed called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that group was to dig up all the dirt that happened and to create an honest historical account of what happened at these schools. And they published their report back in 2015. Okay. None of this is in dispute. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't know anyone who's arguing with anything I've said so far. So then in 2021, the New York Times runs an article claiming that there are mass graves and unmarked graves surrounding the Catholic boarding schools in Canada.
The New York Times publishes this article, and then like everyone and their mother publishes an article. Like the whole media goes crazy about these these mass graves, and the body count just goes up and up and up and up. So it's like 3,000 children in mass graves. And
it also appears to be a problem that like when the New York Times doesn't have a good source, then the New York Times becomes the source of the other articles that become the source of the other articles. And so it's just a perpetuating like source cycle happening. Yeah. You know, and in the following months after that article, there is not a single mass grave found. There is no bodies exhumed. The New York Times was kind of quoting a conspiracy theorist who'd been discredited multiple times. And nothing new was added to the public record, and nothing. The 2015 report still stood as the official report. There was no new information in 2021. But as a result of this article, a persecution was started in Canada where 68 churches were desecrated or burned or otherwise destroyed.
Yeah. A great many of them Catholic, not all of them Catholic.
Exactly. My understanding is majority Catholic.
Yeah.
And it's not clear who's responsible for the persecution in a sense. Like there's a couple cases where we know that maybe an indigenous group was protesting at the church. These are often churches for the indigenous people. Like these are the community churches of the indigenous population. And there were indigenous people standing up against these protests saying, don't burn down our own church, you know, but it's not clear who burned the churches. It could have been the white population of Canada. That's one of the things that's out there. Like, was it like a radical kind of progressive group that was burning these churches? Yeah. All right. Those are the facts. And I think the question is, how did it happen in Canada? Why did it happen in Canada? And could it happen here?
So, like recently, there's on Barry Weiss's podcast, she interviewed this reporter, Terry Glavin. And a year after all of this news broke, he was asked to write a kind of summary, looking back, retrospective piece on like, you know, the year Canada dealt with the mass grave thing. And he wrote a piece that was like, we got this totally wrong. And he was a reporter that had worked reporting stories that...
well, in a way, he's a reporter on genocide. Like he'd both worked on the Chinese genocide. He'd worked on the boarding schools already. He was kind of an expert in the subject.
Yeah, and cared a lot about First Nation people, and had spent basically his career reporting on that. And like he had been calling this a cultural genocide for years. And so he reports on how this was all a hoax, and now he's labeled a genocide denier. And all of Canada's like cultural institutions are against him, and he'll probably never be, you know, able to like write a book again, or
he's been canceled.
He's been canceled, majorly canceled him. Yeah.
So there's kind of a couple aspects here. Like one is journalistic malpractice.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like we're seeing that here in the US also. My first sign of this was many years ago when the guy wrote the book or the piece on an Apple computer and talking about like all their bad workplace practices in China.
Yeah.
And he did the whole circuit. He was on NPR and everything. And then it came out that they proved he'd never actually been inside the factory.
Yeah.
And that it was all made up, you know? So that's journalistic malpractice. So there's always been that, right?
Yeah.
The thing that changed was when they started talking about this at journalism schools. A Wall Street Journal reporter said that when he went to talk about it, the student body of the journalism school just didn't care. They just weren't outraged by this.
Yeah.
Right? Like as he was as an old school reporter. And their reasoning was, yes, but isn't it true? But yes, but don't we want to hold Apple accountable like this, right? So the truth was no longer the point.
Right.
That it went down the correct narrative was the point.
Yeah.
Right? So somehow journalism's doing malpractice because they care about supporting their narrative more than they care about actual facts.
Yeah, I heard another like reporter comment. It's like young reporters think they're supposed to be like
activists.
Yeah. You kind of use the truth to suit you. And what is truth is less important is a point that Terry Glavin brought up.
And unfortunately, there's like this like real damage happens when 2 or 3 groups of powerful people combine. Right. So somehow the Canadian politicians liked this.
Yeah.
You know, and now I think we should also point out the weirdness of this. The New York Times article came down to the day on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And literally the Canadian politicians said, this is our
George Floyd moment. Yes. Right. And Justin Trudeau, you know, said, you know, the burning of these churches is unacceptable, but it's truly understandable. Or that was the word he used, right?
But they kind of had it
fully understandable.
Right.
That people, you know, feel all this rage and anger, etc.
And Justin Trudeau, same person who's been caught in blackface multiple times, has wanted to talk about systemic racism in Canada, even though Canada does not have a history of slavery. Yeah. You know, which just gets kind of wild. And it's almost like I have Canadian relatives and I don't think they listen to this podcast, and I apologize in advance if you do, but it's almost like Canada is kind of like aping American politics. Yeah. Like they want to show that they're more enlightened and more liberal or whatever. Therefore, they need kind of the same problems we're dealing with to want to make a point how much better they deal with them. Another example Terry Glavin made was like when Roe v. Wade is overturned in the U.S., Justin Trudeau does a press conference. Yeah. Right. Even though it's
big show about women in Canada.
So he's very much reacting to the American political landscape as opposed to just a domestic local politics. Right?
Yeah. So Terry Glavin was not by any means a like Catholic friendly, or well, he seems to be not religious from what I can gather. He doesn't have any specific love for the church. I think the kind of any appreciation he does have for the church is that he sees like some of the First Nation people like love their worship, you know, and have been at these Catholic churches for a long time. And I think he was very sad to see them burnt down because generations of First Nations people had been going to these churches. You know, they sort of glossed over this point. It wasn't totally important, but he said, you know, the Catholic churches were doing their missions and then they were ministering to the First Nation people. And then the Canadian government decides that they're going to do this kind of like aggressive assimilation program. And so they take control of these schools. So, you know, where the blame lies, you know, he is not exonerating the church at all, but there's might be a real murky line of how much is the government, and maybe it might be more than people are comfortable with, the government's guilt. Another thing he brings up is like some of his like friends that had been like very militant for Indigenous rights or whatever, had been very concerned with like mercury in the water, clean water, sort of infrastructure type stuff that the government should be doing for the First Nation people that they're not doing.
There's kind of like systemic problems that the First Nation that are unacceptable, that like are really bad, like mercury in the water or like super high rates of tuberculosis in the community that are still happening right now. Yeah. And instead of dealing with the problems that actually are on the plate that you could call systemic racism, instead, you're focusing on the past and not addressing the present as the government And this thing we didn't mention in this.
You have a scapegoat, though.
You have a scapegoat, right?
And it's an enemy that is not you.
The Catholic Church.
Yeah.
To the point, Trudeau asked the Pope to come to Canada and apologize, and he did.
Yeah.
You know, so that just shows how much they were scapegoating. You know?
Yeah. And I, especially with like the sex abuse scandal stuff, I've just always been like, the church needs to like apologize, and re-apologize and just keep apologizing, you know? And in this case, like, should the Pope apologize for what the church did that was wrong? Like, yeah. But it was like a big show that actually maybe misled or played into a lie, and did it help people? This reporter said it was really meaningful to the First Nation people.
Yeah, so it's not like Pope Francis' visit was all a waste, and it's not like the Catholic Church is also completely innocent. But there's also this problem that, like, why did it happen? And part of the reason why it happened was we allowed a certain amount of slander to exist. Yeah. Right? And what I mean by that is, like, with the church sex abuse crisis is a good corollary example. So it's like, did this crime happen? Did the church do almost everything they're accused of? Answer is yes. Was this also happening in public institutions, major institutions run by other churches, et cetera, et cetera? The answer to that's also yes.
Yeah.
Right? Therefore, is it right to always, but whenever you say somebody saying, well, you're just singling us out, I'm like, well, shut up, because like we did do it and we should apologize, right?
Right.
But you end up creating this like problem of like not showing two sides. And you end up creating this tinder where it's like, it does seem justified to just hate it as an evil organization. Yeah. And then when something like this happens, which even's a lie, it's like a spark on that tinder. And that's how you get these 68 church attacks.
Exactly. Because, and I think like the Catholic Church does absolutely need to take responsibility and acknowledge anything, you know, like it needs to be in the light. But it's hard to do like, we're not as bad as you say, or these people are bad too, without sounding like you're trying to like shirk your responsibility.
I do think there's ways to do it though. There's two ways to say like, hey, I want to investigate public school problems. I want to investigate these other problems, right? And to kind of get the record and to get people's minds right about it, right? As opposed to always just apologize.
Exactly. And this story really flipped my thinking on that.
Same here. Yep.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of seeding hate when you just acknowledge our role and we're the only people who want to. And it's exactly what China's doing right now, where China's like running a genocide. And when you say, hey, you're running a genocide, they go, but what about what you did 100 years ago? And it's like, not actually relevant. Like good try, but that's a deflection, you know? All right. The other thing that's interesting about this, that this is an American political theory and a Canadian political theory. By the way, I feel like what we first did was, here's the undisputable facts. Now we're in the realm of interpreting this, and that's definitely disputable. But one of the ideas is that, like in Occupy Wall Street, we had a unified group of people who said, we're the 99 against the 1%. Right. It's really the 0.1%. Right. And ever since that moment of Occupy Wall Street, we've had this rise in critical race theory, this rise in identity politics, the transgender stuff. And part of the way you can interpret this is the people in power saw the people out of power, the 99, starting to unify. And they thought, oh, no, we need to break that group up, you know, and create drama, you know, within that group. Right. Yeah. And that also could be what's happening in the Canadian political landscape, is that in order to deflect and kind of keep things where they can keep power, they're breaking up the unity within the people with weird drama debates that aren't even founded on truth.
Yeah. And I think like Terry Glavin's take was, you know, for the federal government, you kind of get people to believe like, you guys are terrible. You're all racist. You're all bigoted. You're all whatever. And now here we are, like the enlightened people, and we can fix it, you know. And it's a very convenient way to kind of keep or increase your power. But I think for Canada, it's interesting because the sort of Indigenous people story in Canada is very different from the one in the US, you know, and they didn't have slavery the way that we did. And this is like something that, you know, Canadians had been very proud of. And maybe it wasn't like a fully honest story, and that needs to be told truthfully, but you tear apart this kind of uniting thing that people had been proud of, you know.
I think it was a mostly honest story. I think Canada deserves credit for not having slavery. I think they deserve credit for being the end point of the Underground Railroad. Now they actually just don't have as many large minorities, don't have to deal with as many serious issues because of that, but it is something that I think they should rightly be proud of.
I think they should be proud of it too. I think it sounded to me a little bit like maybe it was a little romanticized and ignored ugly parts, but mostly it is a thing to be proud of.
I wouldn't mind having a podcast sometime about national story and whether or not the whole concept of that is evil or it's absolutely necessary for having unity in your nation. Yeah. And I also wouldn't, as related to that, the concept of assimilation, because right now the word assimilation for some years has been thought of as 100% racist. But it's like, you do just have to have some assimilation. You just have to have some melting pot, or you're just not going to move forward as a society in any unified way. So I wouldn't mind having that conversation more in depth. Well, first off, to me, this is so weird. It's just more funny than even provoking. But like the idea that Trudeau is like the hero of like race relations while having done these like really weird blackface, not once, but multiple times. Yeah. It's just great. It's just like, wow. Like, can you get any more naked, like, hypocrisy or something? I don't know.
You know what was interesting is that Terry Glavin was like, can you imagine if, like, Joe Biden? And I'm like, Joe Biden's got a whole bunch of weird crap in his, like, about race and, like, who he was friends with and supporting segregation. And also just all the weird racist things he's ever said are so many. So many.
Yeah. He said something about Obama being, like, a well-spoken, intelligent black guy that was just like, what? Yeah. But
well, one time he said something like, this initiative is not only for poor kids, it's for white kids too.
There you go. All right, whatever. All right, let's drop this off. All right.
You could just go on and on.
The point there is that some people get a pass when other people don't.
Yeah.
Let's go, though, to disingenuous conversation another way, is that a lot of people aren't paying attention to this, but China has some stuff going on. I know I keep talking about China, but like they basically have a population of people, the Uyghurs, where 1 million people are in labor camps and slaves. Right. And they're trying to wipe out their culture. They're also killing people, doing organ harvesting and selling those organs into the Middle East. Like the list goes on and on. It's got to be even worse than we know, because whenever anyone creates a dark veil over something and doesn't want to let you know, what you do discover is only the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Okay. They've also got this with Falun Gong. They've also been exploiting prisoners for decades and decades, where what they'll do is they'll basically use a prison population to compete and create something for export, which we in the US are, and this is international law, like you can use a prison population to maybe make something for the government or to be productive at some level. Like I think at where I went to state school, I think our furniture might have been made from prison work, right? But what you're not allowed to do is like export it and try to compete with foreign companies using prison labor, because that's what we call human slavery. Yeah. Right? Not sweatshops, but literal human slavery. Yeah. That's exactly what that is, right? China right now, I did the math this week, has more people in that type of slavery than the US had slaves in 1830. Yeah. Okay. And the US and the UN are calling China out on it over China's protests, right? The US has said, look, this whole province where the Uyghur genocide's happening, you can't sell us products from that province. Like we'll still import from China, but not from that province because we don't know if that was made by the slaves. All right. Canada doesn't have any of these laws. Yeah. Canada has been under serious Chinese influence for a while. Their politicians are under Chinese influence. They've been very compromised on this. Yeah. And therefore, they never have even recognized the genocide in China. Yeah. All right. Even though the UN has, even though the US has, even though Great Britain has, Canada won. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Canada's kind of got a fake genocide. They're using fake things about their own genocide issue in the past, while not dealing with real systemic racism now and not dealing with China. And it's just all a lie. Yeah. It's all disingenuous conversation to where it's like, why are we even talking if you're going to lie this much? Yeah. Well, first of all, that China's a part of the UN is wild, right? But it's
really dark if you kind of let yourself kind of think about what conclusions you can draw. China really played up these like mass grave stories before they were called out, more seriously about the Uyghur population, right? And so then it's like, just how convenient that these fake stories really blew up, right when this issue of yours was going to come to a head. And that's very dark.
This is what, some conservatives now call the whataboutism. But what about what you did?
Right. It's like a logical fallacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say one good thing about the UN, and then I probably said my piece. I do think communication's good, even communication between people who don't have the same values, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, let's have all the diplomats all get together in one big group, and we can call it the UN. What's wrong with the UN that is hurting us and hurting anyone who's buying into the myth is the idea of universal human rights that we all agree to.
Yeah.
Right? If you even take the UN's documents right now, Google them on like the universal women's human rights, or just even the rights of the worker universally, it's ridiculous. It's like Catholics can't agree to the universal women's human rights.
Yeah.
None of the Islamic nations agree to it, But because of these documents, we create this kind of lie and fraud that makes the UN quite bad.
Yeah.
But if we just saw it as like, look, no matter how bad China is, we need to be talking to them.
Yeah.
And we do.
I think, and I agree with that no matter how bad. But we have been doing this thing for a long time where we pretend like people are being honest when we know they don't value honesty, or truth. Right. Our government probably does dishonest things, too. I think it's still like a value, in our country in a way that may not be true in Russia or China or like, I don't want to say like, oh, the US is like so honest, did you just go to the optometrist just 1 minute ago?
Yeah, I had to put on my shades because you're too cool.
What am I saying? The US, I'm not saying that we've never done anything dishonest, but we as a people, like mostly still, I think, value honesty as, and our government's like officials at least pretend to be honest.
I do think there's a world of difference between our government and some of the worst governments in the world. I don't think it's a difference of a small amount of degrees. It's almost a difference of type, right? So I'm agreeing with you on all that. I do think right now in our discourse, we're having a huge problem with our own disingenuous conversations.
Yeah, no, I do.
We got to get over that, because it's like there's a lie at the foundation of like, oh, well, we all agree in the Constitution. Well, no, we don't. There's a lot of people who think the Constitution is a bankrupt document, right? And therefore pointing to it to prove points is not working out so well. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Clark. I think we're gonna link to stuff we talked about, right?
Yeah, hopefully we'll link to the full Russell Brand interview and other things we talked about. Yeah. We also need to link to
Barry Weiss's Terry Glavin
podcast called Honestly. It's very good.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Send us recommendations on how to live a less consumeristic lifestyle, and we will talk to you later.
All right, bye, Clark.
Bye. Banjo music, start.